Welcome to Not Just Ads, the show where B2B brands discover how creator-led content drives pipeline, builds trust, and grows long-term brand equity. Each episode, we speak with business leaders, founders, and creators who are defining their categories. I'm your host, Marcus Sherwin, and this is the creator economy for B2B. Hello and welcome today to Not Just Ads, the creator economy for B2B. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Frida Rmb. Frida is a CMO at Rieland. They are a AI company based out of the Nordics, specifically in the CFO space. It's a really exciting space to be in. Frida has a number of years' experience. She's been a multiple time CFO across a number of different scale-ups and really well-known brands in the B2B space, and I'm delighted to have her on the show today. Frida, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you for being here, or asking me to be here.
Great to have you on. You posted something on LinkedIn about the B2B and software in particular, and how, sometimes that we kind of think, with AI and how things are changing and everything, but like in the grand scheme of things, I think we're only about 2% of the GDP globally. You mentioned that you saw something in Lemkin, I think it was last week, an article or something. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about that for the audience. We kind of assume that everything is getting disrupted, everything is changing, but when you take a view out, you kind of see, actually, okay, look, we kind of need to get out of our own echo chambers to some extent and kind of see how this fits into the whole world as a whole.
Lemkin, to start with, is a B2B SaaS expert guru, and he publishes a newsletter. I think it's weekly, actually, that it goes out, and I try to read it as often as possible. And this was the newsletter that went out last week, where he touched upon obviously everything that's happening within software, but also the fact that if we take a step back, the whole world doesn't really care about our product launches and what's happening within B2B software. And it's easy when you're in this little bubble, and especially I would say on LinkedIn, since LinkedIn is such a core channel. Obviously, there's more people than B2B software people hanging out on LinkedIn, but still there's a lot of content and talks and discussions and posts going out about obviously what's happening within AI. Everything's changing now, disruptive. If you're not keeping up, you're going to be left behind. There's a lot of fear of missing out. I mean, I talk to my executive friends within the space, and we all feel this constant stress. Like, are we betting on the right horse? Are we doing the right thing? What if that? What if this? And obviously everybody is feeling it. And I think it's important to sometimes just, take a step back and realize that, okay, there's other stuff going on. And obviously, yes, it's important if you want to keep on being within B2B tech and the software space to stay ahead and be curious and learn, obviously. But there's also other things in the world, life. And I think it's just important sometimes to remind yourself of that.
I think perspective is really key, definitely. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that, actually, in terms of Rieland, because you're in a really interesting space. You do automation specifically focusing on CFOs and finance departments, making their lives easier with AI. It's a really interesting space.
Yeah, sure. So Rieland is a AP automation and payments company. So obviously, just as you say, we target the CFO space. The buyer for us is the CFO, the AP manager, whoever takes care of incoming invoices and accounts payable in that sense. And Rieland as a company has actually been around for quite some time. We were sort of born or founded in the 90s. It's a Swedish company to begin with. Our core markets or home markets are the Nordics, so Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. But with that said, Rieland is the result of a couple of mergers and acquisitions. So it was only until 4 years ago or something like that when we were bought by a PA company called Altor here in the Nordics that Rieland as a brand and a company was born. So we are more or less sort of entering US, which is one of the sort of the bigger markets that we're betting on, but also actually sort of re-establishing our brands in the Nordic markets with Rieland as the brand instead of the brands that we used to be. So it's a super interesting space. There's a lot of things happening, I would say, in the CFO office space, and especially when talking about AI, there's so much potential in terms of how you can actually leveraging AI within the finance space, based on the fact that everything within finance is more or less data.
And then you kind of brought the brand of Rieland together 4 years ago. Was AI always the focus then in terms of like, was it timing? You kind of see that there's a really good value proposition in terms of how we can leverage AI, and then let's build out this brand based on what we have here, and then specifically focusing on the CFO / finance departments and how they can actually get value from this.
I wouldn't necessarily say that AI was the focus to begin with. I would say the narrative a couple of years back was more automation.
Okay.
But then automation, some of the automation was done by AI, but most of the automation was more rule-based. And now we're moving away from that and letting AI help us with the automation instead. And then on top of that, there's so much we can do with AI in the platform in terms of everything from, chatbots to prompt handling and so forth. So now it's more important for us to position ourselves as making automation happen by leveraging AI. And of course, everything in the platform is AI enabled. That's how we make automation happen in that sense.
It's a really interesting space. How do you find then, from like the ICP that you have, that's your core customer, then say a CFO, when you're marketing to somebody like that, they're, I guess now, okay, maybe I'm being a bit stereotypical to some extent, but it's someone that like they want to see what the proof is there. I guess it's very data driven, as you mentioned as well. It's probably people that are responsible for signing off for a lot of things within a company, and you're marketing specifically to them. What do you find is from a CMO's perspective, like was there kind of challenges when you launched the brand in terms of how you would approach that from, say, other roles that you had in previous companies as a CMO? What would you say was like kind of even learning curves or big differences? Anything you found that you kind of go, okay, we may have to approach this a little bit differently?
Super good question. Before joining Rieland, I was at another SaaS company called GetAccept. And that was a platform that was targeting sales and marketing people. And obviously being in sales and marketing myself, that was kind of easy because I'm sort of marketing towards myself. So it was definitely a challenge coming in to Rieland and trying to understand, okay, first and foremost, who are our buyers? What do they respond to? And where are they? Channels are they present? How do we talk to them? How do we build trust and evidence and proof of concept? And that wasn't as easy as I thought. Like in sales and marketing, or trying to target sales and marketing, it's all of them are hanging out on LinkedIn. All of them are present and nurturing their networks and their communities and their events and so forth. They are much more easy to approach in that sense. The CFO office, they are also in these channels, but they don't necessarily show themselves. They don't necessarily engage. They are kind of hard to convince, which I kind of like in a sense, because then you really need to try and you have to come up with, you have to build your messaging on data, on showing, building trust by showing evidence and proof of concept, whether it's customer testimonials or whether it's other kinds of insights. So data, numbers, insights, what other customers are saying are, I would say, core. And then they also spend a lot of time, now I'm generalizing, of course, but also trusting their peers. So we understood quite quickly, if we can sort of get into the CFO bubble and group ourselves and show that we are trustworthy, there's a chance that they start talking among each others about us. So we've been trying to do that, obviously starting small and then scaling it by launching. For example, we have our own research report that we drop bi-monthly. It's built on our own data and research. That's one thing. We've launched our future CFO webinar series, where we're interviewing CFOs and sort of getting insights from them and sharing that with other CFOs. So it's been a little bit different in the approach, I would say, but it's a super good question. It's very interesting to understand how you need to go about it depending who you're targeting to.
Definitely. I think it's like what you mentioned on LinkedIn. Like if you're from a sales and marketing background, the approach has probably changed now. Maybe from before it was like gated white papers and all this, and now it's kind of maybe more educational and so on. And the narrative on LinkedIn for that particular category within software is like, white papers don't work at all, they're out. And it's true, they don't work in that. But if you talk to somebody in biopharma or something that's like requires a lot of research, it does work there. So it's kind of, it's, but when you're in the echo chamber, you're kind of like, no, it doesn't work. So I think it's always really interesting to talk to people that are working or marketing to different kind of ICPs. I'd love to ask you a little bit about, in terms of the research papers that you mentioned, what normally is, when you look at that and when you kind of compile that, what's normally kind of things that are like important to a CFO? And now I know that like, okay, profit and obviously those things, but like in terms of when they're kind of educating themselves, like what are there kind of trends that you see there that like, okay, this actually resonates well with a CFO versus, just general trends?
No, but what we have, first and foremost, I have to tell a funny story because I asked our own CFO because I wanted to understand what would make you read something that we would share. And what he said was like, it needs to be short, it needs to be tight. I might have a time slot between 9 and 9:15 when I've gone through my inbox, and then I'm jumping into the next meeting. So if you can create something snackable that I can read in that time slot, then I will. Okay, thank you. Good input. So based on that, the report is very easy to grasp. It's full of numbers. And the topics that we've been focusing on is automation, AI in finance, and how the CFO role is evolving. And what we've done is that we've asked hundreds of CFOs in the Nordic countries and hundreds of CFOs in the US market, and then compile that data into, obviously, insights. So what we can see is, back again to what I mentioned at the beginning of the chat, that there's so much potential for AI and obviously then also automation within finance. But with that said, if you look at the adoption curve of AI, the finance department is actually not far ahead at all. I would say HR and marketing and sales, for that matter, is much more ahead. And finance is like at the beginning of the curve, starting to climb. And why is that, you might ask then? And these are super interesting questions to discuss with CFOs, because they're well aware of the fact that they should and that they can become much more efficient with AI. But they are also cautious about governance, making sure that the data is not lost to somebody else's wrong hands, making sure that the analyses are correct. And if they just leave it to AI, how will they make sure that it's actually correct? And how can they stand behind whatever analysis or numbers that come out of that? And then obviously they understand that the more they're training their AI, the better it will become. But there's still some kind of, hesitation to get going. And then back again to how we try to position ourselves is really, how can we be a vendor that they can sort of hold hands with, and knowing that if we go with Rieland, we will be AI enabled, because Rieland will have AI features in the platform, and they will show us step by step how to AI enable ourselves and make sure that we become much more efficient and much more automated. And that's something that I notice resonates with them.
No, it's a really interesting space, because I think what you say, that the big challenge a lot of times is the narrative of like kind of marketing, how CFOs sign off on budgets and so on, but then it's like, okay, how do you create alignment with them so that you're both speaking the same language and so on? From what I understand, I don't think it's necessarily that like they just don't sign off it because they don't understand it. I think it's more maybe the profile of like kind of, it's just caution. It's like, look, unless we can see the proof, we don't sign off on something that we can't see that it's going to add and be effective. And it's probably the same with AI as well, with the level of trust and so on.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with we don't understand it. It's definitely more, do we trust it, and how do we know it's accurate, and what level of accuracy do we expect before we just let go? And then obviously they are hard demanding people. They want it to be needed to be top notch.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how you're now have a huge presence in the US. I think you have an office as well in Austin. Is that right?
Yeah.
maybe you could just share a little bit about, operating predominantly in the Nordic markets, and then from then expanding over to the US. Maybe you could just share, like, some of the differences, innovation, challenges, things that you notice in terms of the rhythm, how business works there, anything you see in terms of the differences between the two regions.
I think what's interesting the ground rule with going into the US is always that it's more costly than you think, and it takes more time than you think. And that's obviously true for our expansion into the US as well. I think one thing that I've thought about when we were entering was that we were coming from the Nordics, having 30 plus years of experience, being a solid Nordic company. One of the things that we thought was going to work was just that. Like, if we can just tell them that, we have 30 years of experience and we come from the Nordics, and there's a lot of great companies coming from the Nordics, we will have some, the foot into the door in that sense. But that has been harder, I would say, than expected. Yes, it can be a conversation starter to talk about the Nordic heritage and the fact that we have 30 years of experience. But I would say immediately after that, we have to prove ourselves and show that we have the same or better capacity and product compared to the players in the US market. So all of this, the Nordic narrative quite quickly disappears after the first conversations around it. It's a fun conversation starter, but it doesn't build the trust that we might have thought before entering. So that's a big thing that we've learned, I think. Another thing that we've learned is that, we are more advanced in the Nordics when it comes to automation and AI within the finance space. There's much more manual processes going on in the US. They still pay with checks between companies, as an example. And some of the companies that we turn to, they do think that they are automated. But when we start to scratch the surface, we realize that no, you might be, digitized, but you're not automated at all. And you definitely don't use AI. In that sense, it's sort of an old school. It's interesting. It's so much more old school, the whole system and the whole process in that sense. And that's something that we need to approach. Another thing that we've learned is that the buyers are then not necessarily present in digital channels the way they are in the Nordics either. The best events that we have or activities that we run in the US are the old school traditional big, huge expos.
Yeah.
Which is also not something that we do in the Nordics. So that's also a big learning that, okay, we need to spend a lot of money going to these huge expos, having a booth, walking the floor, being up on stage and doing presentations, having happy hours and side events. These are the things that I did 10, 15 years ago, and I haven't done in my previous assignments, to be honest. But in the US, that honestly still works towards the CFO persona. They are truly at these expos to meet with vendors, to discuss, to buy, which is not the case, I would say, when we meet buyers on fairs and expos in Sweden, as an example.
It's really interesting. When you look at CFOs then in the US, when you went into the market, did you kind of identify, okay, look, we're going to go after this category, CFOs within a particular category where you get like traction quicker? Or is it like, I'm sure there are multiple categories that the Rieland is applicable to, but did you find that there were certain kind of categories where you had like maybe a quicker adoption?
Yeah, we've quite clearly, I would say, narrowed down our ICP to a few industries. And then, just as you say, we could go after more industries. The product and platform itself is definitely applicable. But given the fact that US is such a huge market, we can't be everywhere. We do not have the same marketing budget as our competitors in the US, which is fine. But then we have to have a more solid, clear focus towards a certain number of industries and then go after those specifically.
It makes sense, I guess, to win where you can and then expand. How do you find then when you meet CFOs at certain expos and so on, like when there's an interest there, they can see the value that you bring? How long does it normally take then from kind of like bringing them on that journey to where they implement the tool and see the value of the tool in their organization as well?
I would say a sales cycle is normally 4 or 5 months for us, from not necessarily from the first conversation, from when they have a high intent interest to buy, and then when we actually close the deal. Then they go into onboarding, and that also takes a couple of weeks or something like that until they onboarded and ready with the system. And then obviously there's a onboarding period when we help them to become even more automated. They have a customer success manager, obviously, that help them continuously to have better and better or get better and better value from the system.
Do you find then with the organizations, because for a B2B cycle, like 4 to 5 months it's relatively quick. Like normally sometimes it can be even 6 to 9 or even longer in some cases for certain complicated integrations. Do you find that, is there a particular type of size company then that you find that like that's that kind of one that drives the quicker adoption?
Yeah, we try to hone in on what we call mid-sized companies. And for us, that is plus 200 employees to maybe maximum 5,000.
Okay.
Not saying that we wouldn't go after a bigger company if we needed to or wanted to, but we try to focus on that. That's the sweet spot, I would say. And then obviously we also look at invoice volume so that we understand what they actually are trying to process or need to process through the system and how we can help them with that.
Makes a lot of sense. With marketing then, so it sounds very much like that in the US, where you see a lot of traction is like kind of trade shows, events, and kind of creating an experience around that. So when you look at your planning then for a year and you're looking at like kind of US versus rest of world, is it very much focused on kind of like how can we get the best out of our attendance at this particular event that we're doing? And like kind of from a CMO standpoint, what do you normally look at in terms of, is it like meetings booked, or is it like pipeline, or is there any kind of other aspects of KPIs that you look at as well?
I mean, I myself come from the sales side of things, so I'm very revenue oriented.
Sure.
And my whole marketing team is built around supporting the overall sales targets that we have at Rieland. So primarily we look at book meetings, we look at pipeline generated, and then ARR closed, and then obviously compare that to the cost so that we have an ROI on each event that we do. Those are the main KPIs, I would say. But with that said, we also try to, given the fact that trust is so important in this space, we put a lot of effort into building position as thought leaders within this space. Sorry. So at each event that we go to, we always try to be part of a panel discussion, or we try to have a speaking opportunity on stage so that we can show and tell that we are a player in the space that you can trust and that actually knows what we're doing and that we have this vast experience. And we also usually build the presentations on the data from the finance labs reports that we have so that people or the CFOs understands that, okay, this is a vendor that knows what they're talking about, and they actually have their own data to support it and back it up. Yes, it's not a KPI in that sense, but it's something that we always try to make happen on top of everything else so that we take the opportunity.
I think it's a really good play as well of like having what you mentioned earlier on about the report that you bring out. That obviously gives you a ton of data points, but also a ton of conversation openers, I guess, as well, but your ideal ICP at trade shows, and obviously the input then that you can bring and value you can bring to a panel as well is really insightful for the audience. When you look at thought leadership, then a lot of what we're seeing on LinkedIn over the last, say, 18 months or so is like around the thought leadership piece of whether it's internally within the company of like, or else on the kind of creator / thought leadership piece from external, an expert in the category or somebody that's an ambassador with a brand. How do you see this playing out as being like kind of leveraged from a CMO's point of view in terms of when you look at positioning yourselves? Do you see kind of like thought leadership within the organization, amplifying that with thought leader ads? Has it been effective for you as an org?
Yes, I would say it has. I mean, that is a big part of our overall marketing strategy, I would say. So far, it's mainly organic. So what we've done is that we've identified a couple of key stakeholders within the business, like our CEO, our CPTO, FP&A person within the CFO team, myself, and a couple of others that are sharing content on LinkedIn, a mix of, trying to inspire, trying to teach, but not come across as, how would you say it?
Preaching, no?
Preaching, and then also actually highlighting the challenges within the business and the industry right now, and trying to get that feeling of, yes, we have that too. What's the solution? So it is. I think it's important with thought leadership, since thought leadership is built on personal. It's a mix of personal, or it is a personal brand putting forward a business brand, obviously, but that you then actually mix it with business content and personal content, and maybe squeezing in a bit of fun in there too, because otherwise, in my opinion, it doesn't become, realistic. Or
Have you seen any success stories there?
you mean thought leadership?
Thought leadership, what I mean is, say, thought leadership, essentially somebody that's not necessarily working for a particular company, but that they are a subject matter expert / thought leader in the finance space, particularly, let's say, for example, procurement or CFO. And they talk about that, but then because they have a good point of view and are insightful, they also do sponsorships with brands, and they've affiliations with certain organizations as well.
There are a few that I've come across. We've been really looking, to be honest. It's definitely not as easy as within the sales and marketing space. Yeah, that's also one of the things actually that I've been surprised how difficult it's been to find these people that, one, have the knowledge and the experience, two, wants to talk about it, and three, wants to actually put themselves out there and be known for something. I think a lot of people have one and two, but they don't want to put themselves out there, and then it, everything fails in that sense. And then there's also, I would say, a couple of influencers or thought leaders, I would say, that we've come across that hasn't really, for example, we've tried partnership with influencers with a finance profile, and it didn't work at all. Then obviously we could find others as well, but it's still back to, it's quite difficult, I have to say.
I think the alignment piece is key, really, isn't it? If you kind of feel that, okay, we can try it and it doesn't work, then if the audience see this as a bit of a mismatch, it's not going to work for either the brand or the creator either, really. It has to feel that it's authentic.
Yeah, exactly. So what we try to do instead is, back again to the Future CFO webinar series that we're running, where we constantly interview CFOs. We try to engage them instead, because most of them, having said yes to be a guest in a webinar, then obviously you have some kind of that you think it's fine to be out there. So we're trying to engage with them afterwards to have them share things or content that we have, but also engage in whatever things we are posting. And some of them are, which is very positive. So we're trying to, leveraging that even more so.
It's, I think the other topic that's really interesting, we touched on it earlier, is around the CFO and the marketing piece, in terms of like how they look at marketing as a channel and stuff. Maybe you discussed this already on the series, but I think from people from a marketing background, they always have that challenge of like trying to prove value and so on, and marketing to the CFO, but you really only get it from the perspective from a marketing side. So I think it's always interesting to see how the CFO sees these things as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Well, Frida, it was brilliant talking with you. If anyone wants to find out more, we will put the link to the CFO series on the show notes. But about Rieland, about where you share content, where are you most active, and where can we find out more?
I am very active on LinkedIn myself, and Rieland.com is the go-to place.
Great. All right. Will we put it all on the show notes? Frida, thanks again for joining us on the show. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you, Marcus. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.